Okay. Well, I just wanted to start by, it is very special for me, and I hope it's you know, that you feel as half as exciting as I am by just meeting you people here, okay?
¿Está entendido? Marcelo.
Understand, okay.
Mira, si querés traducir un poquito, Rita, porque yo
Que él está muy contento de estar acá y que espera que ustedes estén tan contentos con él como él lo está.
Okay, so when I was elected president of the Cantors Assembly, which is the international body of Chazanim in the world, and I was the president, and I gave a talk in acceptance, and I wrote this down because it was a Shechianu. So let's sing this together, and then we'll go into something else. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Sheheyanu Vekiyemanu Vehigiyanu Lachman Hazeh Sheheyanu Vehigiyemanu Vehigiyanu Lachman Hazeh Lachman Hazeh. Amen. Now, I wanted to share with you a very interesting, and it may be a little bit difficult at first, but I want you to have it. And what it is a interesting, rare citation from the Talmud, if I can find it.
Citas del Talmud quiere compartir con ustedes.
And then you will understand why I picked that. I want to see if I've got copies of it. You may have to share.
¿Él escribió esta música? ¿Él escribió esta música?
This is by Abraham Lubin.
What's that?
If you wrote that, please.
Yeah. Who wrote it?
¿Katabta?
Ken. Yes, I wrote it. So, what I wanted to share with you is I want to see if I could got more copies of that. I may not have enough. I was traveling all around. I want to leave with you a copy of an Arvit Lechol that I improvise at the conventions that take place every year in different places in the United States.
Él presentó esta en las distintas
And
convenciones.
I've attended for decades. I never missed one convention. Every time it is held, so I was invited several times to sing at the convention. And so what I did once at a Maariv service, I improvised the whole Maariv service. And I had a good colleague by the name of Danny Gildar, who is a very, very good musician. And I just told him, I'm going to sing the Maariv service. I don't know what is going to happen because I improvised the whole thing. So I don't have any music for you, but just gave him the key, and I started singing that key, and he followed me.
Le dio el pie para que lo siga y
And
improvisó
I
más.
sang it in the style of one of the great 20th century Chazanim, Leib Glanz. Now, I don't know if you have ever heard of Leib Glanz, but to me, we know of the great Chazanim of the 20th century, from Yasser Roseblatt to Pierre Pinchik to...
The Golden Age. The Golden Age.
Yes, the Golden Age of Chazanim, and they were great, and their own style, and that was the East European style mainly. But Leib Glanz, who was born in the Ukraine about in the last years of the 19th century. He was born in 1898.
Excuse me, Abby, would you like some
coffee?
cup of coffee,
Yes,
water?
yes, water is good.
Coffee?
Something, yes. Coffee is good. Coffee is
Coffee
good.
with a little milk?
No milk, no sugar.
Coffee, regular coffee.
I drink the scotch straight up like coffee, nothing mixed. No water, no ice.
It's okay.
Wait, let me see. Okay. So what happened to me, I wanted to do a marriage service in the style of Leber Leclerc. He had a style that's, especially in the later years, we all heard Chazanish records, you know, from Moshe Kusevitsky and some of the others, but he always went a different way, very original, very unique, went a different derech, you know. So I wanted to sing in that style, and to give you an idea of what it is, so then I had it all from the tape, from the cassette tape in those days, I had it all transcribed.
You wanted to follow his way when you started singing as a son?
Yes. No, I didn't study with him. I never heard him, only on the recordings and also in the scores. Mm-hmm. But I always appreciated his uniqueness and originality and his inventiveness and going in a different track, mostly. And so I wanted to daven Amari at the convention in his style. And I didn't know what was going to come out, but I was hoping that there would be enough juices going. So this is the way I started the Hurachum, for example.
Mm-hmm.
יכפר עוון ולא ישחית, והוא רחום יכפר עוון ולא ישחית, והרבה להשיב אפו, והרבה להשיב אפו, ולא יעיר כל חמתו. Now, so I did the whole Mari totally improvised. That's a big chutzpah to do that. Chutzpah. Because you can, if you can get lost and you don't get back to the Nusach, and there are 250 Chazanim in the back of you davening with me, that's not a good thing to do. But I guess in a way, that chutzpah worked out because I improvised the Hashkivenu and the rest of the prayers and so on. And so all of that was transcribed, and I'm going to leave a copy with Gabriel.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. To me, nowadays, it's a big challenge of what a Chazan should do. We know the tensions. I don't do Chazanas today the way I did it 20, 30, 40, even 50 years ago. I started when I was 2 years old, you see. Actually, I started very, very young. I just give you quickly my background. I come from a family of, do you all understand what I'm talking?
Yes.
I come from a family of 5 generations in Israel. But I'm the only one in my family. All my siblings, brothers, sisters were born in Israel, my parents, my grandparents, my great-grandparents, 5 generations. From my mother's side, they were in Yerushalayim. From my father's side, in Tveria, Tiberias. They were of the mystics, the Karliner Hasidim and so on. My father was a monotone, but my mother, beautiful voice, and always sang Yiddish and Hebrew songs. So when my mother was pregnant with me, my father, who was in business, wholesale grocery business in Yerushalayim, he decided to go to London. And my mother was pregnant with me when they did that.
He went alone?
He went with the family.
Okay.
With my mother, who carried me. And when we arrived in London, 3 months later, I was born. And so that's the way I was born in London. It wasn't a mistake, it was just a fact of life. And then after a year, my father said, we're going back to Yerushalayim. So I grew up in Yerushalayim. I didn't know a word of English. I was just a year old. Didn't know a word of Hebrew either at the time. But I grew up there until a few months before my bar mitzvah. He said, we're going back to London. So my bar mitzvah took place in London, and I had to give a Dvar Torah, talked about from the Parsha of the week, whatever it was. Actually, it was a piece from the Talmud. And I spoke in Hebrew because I couldn't speak any other language. And then I stayed in London for 7 years, from age 13 to age 20. I studied at Jews College there, and then I went to the university, and then when I came to the States, I continued the music theory and musicology, and do doctoral studies at the University of Chicago in musicology. And then I also was a Chazan in Dayton, Ohio, while I was going to the conservatory. Anyway, so my background is a kind of a mix of, I like to think of myself as an Anglo-Israeli American, because I've lived here since the age of 20. With wife, children, grandchildren from here. I tell you that because as a child in Yerushalayim, do you know what a diner is? Where they had that jukebox where you put in a quarter and you can listen to the music of, Frank Sinatra.
In the 50s.
Yes, in the 50s. You put a quarter and you go into a diner. They still have it in the States. Yes, they still have it in the States. And what it is, they, thank you. You can have a sandwich there, but somebody else puts the quarter, meanwhile you can listen to it. So in Yerushalayim, outside Mea Shearim, there was a kiosk, and they sold cigarettes, newspapers, candy, things like that. And they had one other thing, which no restaurant has, and that was they had all the classical Chazanut records. Yes, and you would come in, and anybody wants to say, I'd like to hear Rosina Shabbos of Pinchik, and he would put it on, he'd pay a little bit, a grush, and I stood outside and listened, because I couldn't afford to ask. And in our home, we always had records of the great Chazani. And so, when people ask me, when did you decide to become a Chazan? I don't remember when I decided to become a Chazan. It was the most natural thing that I did. It wasn't that I chose to be a Chazan, but Chazanut chose me. It was in my soul, and it didn't occur to me that I would do anything else but be a Chazan. And I must tell you that it's been a very, very rewarding experience for me because if I would have been a lawyer or a surgeon or that, I don't think I would have gotten as much praise and feelings from people of the shuls where I serve because of what I linked them with something spiritual. I started saying that the style of Chazanut changed, but I know that in the Cantors Assembly in North America, we don't have the same kind of congregation anymore as we used to. People would know how to daven and so on, and they would sit back while I would improvise Hashkivenu, Shmotzitenu Beinu, everything, and I had in the earlier years a professional choir of about 8 people with a conductor. Those days are very few. There's still some who have it. But the thrust of these days now is to have as much opportunity for the congregants to participate. That's the key word that's used. They have to be participatory.
So when you improvise, it's
not
more difficult for the crowd to follow you.
So, and you have to sing things that they can participate. They can start singing a very complicated Chazanut and so on because they haven't rehearsed it. And so I do things that allows them to join in, but I allow myself moments, accents here and there, a phrase there and so on, so that I don't lose it and they continue to gain it and know it. And then I've always taken advantage of doing things off the bima. Because off the bima, I can talk to them and teach them what I can't quite do conveniently in the middle of the Shachrit or the Musa. The rabbi could give a Dvar Torah, he can talk about the Torah of the week, the Parsha of the week, and he can say whatever. And the Chazan doesn't have that opportunity on the bima. Although I found opportunities to do sermons in song and talk about. And so I've always enjoyed, in addition to leading the services and everything, to do what we call adult education. Opportunities to teach the congregants. They don't know what Chazanut is, they don't know what the Chazan is, and they don't know what are, and to illustrate. So I've had many times people who say, well, Chazan, why don't you do that? You know, why don't you do this? This is very beautiful what I just heard. And that I like to hear. Because that tells me that maybe there is a need, at the same time a recognition that we now live in the 21st century and the needs are different. They are not prepared musically to what Yossel Rosenbach and Pinchik. When I was a very, very young cousin in Ohio, there was a convention, a conference of Chassidim for 2 days in Cleveland, Ohio. So I drove my car, and I think it was in Chicago, I don't remember now. And one of the guests who was there was Pierre Pinchik. And I was a young cousin, but maybe I was 22, 23. And Pinchik said he needs to see somebody. It was a friend or a relative. So I said, I'll take you there, you know. So I had an opportunity to drive in, and I've used the word chutzpah before. I had the chutzpah of sitting in the car with Pinchik, and I said, I'd like to sing Rosa de Shabbos of Pinchik, which is a classic piece, famous piece of Yossel Rosenbach. And it's a very complicated piece, but I heard it many times from Pinchik when he recordings, and I sang it. That's chutzpah, to sing Yossel and Pinchik's was at a Shabbos in front of Pinchik. And he was very sweet and very nice, and he complimented me, and he said, keep doing what you're doing. I like what you did. That was good. My point is, all of this is that it was a natural thing for me. And when I was 13, 14, 15 in London, I would daven in different shuls in Glasgow and in other places, and they would say always, you know, he sounds like a chazan that he's been there 50 years of doing chazanas, you know. And it was a very natural thing for me. What I want you to do now, what I want to do with you now, we don't have as much time, I want you to listen to one piece of Leiba Leglantz. And I'll see if I can find a copy of the text. Oh yes, there is let's see if I can find it, and I hope that
Sure.